Hi there and welcome. I'm glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire. So today is all about combining products creatively. We're going to combine stencils with stamps, stencils with stencils, die cut with stamps, and much more. So basically we're combining different things we have to get new looks. Now this is something that you can do with a variety of products you may have. I'm focusing on some floral cards today. I just really like these products and I thought they were great for demonstrating these techniques. I have several variations of techniques to show you, and I hope you'll watch because I think there'll be something that will be fun for you to use your products creatively. Let's start with this example here, where we use layering stencils along with a single stencil to really create a fun look. This is the new Craft Your Life project kit from Altenew called Silk Art. Now this includes a lot. You have a 6x8 stamp set and coordinating dies, and coordinating layering stencils, and a coordinating 3D embossing folder. All of these work really well together. You can see the large image in the embossing folder lines up with the stamped image, which lines up with the layering stencils, which lines up with the coordinating dies. So you can mix and match and just use different products together. And I will be using this for my first two cards. First, we'll just be using the stencils, and on the second, we'll be using the stamp set. For the first card, again, I'll be using the stencils, and this is the technique of using layering stencils along with a regular stencil to really step up your image. I use the coordinating die to cut out that large white die cut, and I'm putting it onto my Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat. This makes it really easy to do stenciling. I have the first of the layering stencils included in the kit, and I'm lining it up with my die cut, and that sticky mat holds the stencil in place, which is really handy. I am now using a light pink ink from Altenew and a blending brush to apply a light amount of ink over the openings. Now I thought it'd be fun to mix up the colors, so one of my flowers will be pink, one will be peach, one will be yellow, one will be orange. That's one of the nice things about stencils is you can make different areas different colors. These layering stencils from Altenew are easy to line up because the stencils have engraved markings letting you know which ones layer together and how to orient it. And it also has a guide that comes with the product, which is very helpful. After inking up the openings with different colors, I used a cloth to clean it off. And now I have an older Altenew stencil called Woven Stencil. I'm lining that up with the stencil already on my sticky mat. And I'm just going to tape that there. This isn't actually touching the sticky mat because there's another stencil under it, so the tape is necessary. Now over those same areas and that additional stencil we put on top, I'm applying a heavier amount of darker ink. So this will give like a plaid woven pattern of inking to our flowers. And it's just a great way to create a different look from the products you have. If you don't have layering stencils, try maybe a large polka dot stencil with a striped stencil on top. Or you can do a large floral stencil with a maybe plaid stencil on top. Just mix and match different things together. So I used a darker, heavier amount of ink over these openings. Once I've done that, I can remove the woven stencil, which gives that kind of plaid look. And then I can remove the stencil below it, which is the flowers. And you'll see that our inking has that fun plaid pattern to it, which really changes it up and gives it a different feel. I think without that plaid, it looks a little more formal. This is a little more playful, I guess. And now I'm coming in with the next stencil, placing that onto the sticky mat and I'll hold in place. And this is so I can color in the leaves. I'm using a light amount of Limeade Altenew ink. You can use absolutely any inks for this that you want. I'll wipe my stencil clean, and then there are the centers of the flowers in the stencil too, and I used a dark brown for that. Now we'll come in with that same woven stencil, and I'm lining it back up with the stencil right there on the top left of the stencil we already have on our sticky mat. And again, I'll tape that in place. I do find stenciling on sticky mats super handy because it holds your stencil and die cut where you want it so that you can do the inking without it shifting. All right, so now I am applying a heavier amount of green on top of these openings. So now we'll have that plaid on our green leaves also. You don't need to use a lot of different colors of inks here. You can just do a light amount for the first layer and then a heavier amount for the second layer. All right, so now we're coming in with the next layering stencil. All of this is included in the kit. I'll line that up and again do a solid light application of color. These are the remaining leaves or petals in the flowers. And after I've put that color down, I can put the woven stencil on top once again, lining it up on the top left with the floral stencil behind it. So you have two stencils here on top of each other. This allows you to create this cool layered look. Later, I'll show you how you can use stencils with stamps, stamps with dies, and so on. Really, you can combine any products creatively together. Okay, so here I'm applying a heavier amount over the two stencils, creating that plaid look on the flowers. Once I'm done with the inking, look at this fun, large plaid image I have. Now it's time to add some dimension to this because we have a coordinating embossing folder. It's very easy to do. We're going to take this die cut and line it up with the floral image in our embossing folder. You can see right through the folder and easily line it up. Now for 3D embossing folders from Altenew, I put them directly onto my platform of my Spellbinders Platinum, and then I put a cutting plate on top, and that gives the perfect amount of pressure. You can use these folders with whatever die cut machine you have. Now it's kind of hard to see in the video, but there is a beautiful texture to this now that really enhances the inking that we did. It follows along with the edges of our inking, really making for a 3D look. I want this to stand up on our card with some more dimension, so I die cut 2 die cuts of the same size using the same die from extra white cardstock, and I'm gluing it behind our inked embossed piece. This will give it some secure dimension that'll hold up through the mail nicely. You can use foam tape if you want to, but I really think stacking die cuts gives the best results when you are mailing your card. So I put something heavy on that while it dries, and then I'll add one more die cut behind it. So there are 2 solid white die cuts behind the inked one. Now here I have a piece of white cardstock that I'm applying a little bit of moisture to using a baby wipe. I'm putting that into an embossing folder from Altenew. I really like this basic plaid embossing folder, and I've used it quite a bit. And then I'll run that through my die cut machine. By adding that bit of moisture, it'll allow the impression to be a little bit deeper, and it'll prevent cracking. Now this piece of white cardstock is heavyweight white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so it'll cover the front of our card. This particular embossing folder looks great on both sides when you run the paper through, so you get to pick which one you like best for your particular card. Now I glued that onto a note card of the same size, and now I'm adding our inked floral image onto it, allowing parts of it to hang off the edge. Once it's dry, I can trim off those pieces hanging off the edge to give it a nice clean look. I'll use one of those pieces I cut off and glued up onto the top right corner to fill in that empty space. Once it's dry, I'll trim off the excess. Now for a sentiment, I thought I'd use alphabet dies. I'm using an older Altenew alphabet die set called MISTI. This is a great one because it's thin and tall, so you can add it on top of whatever images you have, and it doesn't cover it up too much. I cut them from black cardstock, and I'm using a MISTI sticky mat that I've cut down a little bit to arrange the letters so they're evenly spaced and lined up nicely. So this is just holding them in place so I can pick them all up together and add onto our card. I'm putting a piece of temporary tape on top to remove all the letters together. I'll flip that over and add liquid adhesive on the back of each letter. I then can pick up the tape all together and lay it right onto my card and leave it there with the tape in place while it dries. Once it's dry, you can remove that tape and you can be sure those letters will stick nicely. By the way, each of those letters is 3 die cuts thick. I cut each letter 3 times and glued them together for some nice dimension that'll hold up going through the mail, even though it is on a textured background. I also added a small sentiment strip under the word hugs using the Altenew Tiny Sentiments Hello stamp set. This is a small set with a great price point and lots of sentiments included. I'll use this throughout the video. I stamped one of those sentiments with black ink on a white cardstock strip. If you want to know how to do that easily, I'll link to a video up here on the top right. I think it might be helpful to you. So there's my little strip there. I flipped it over and I'm putting glue on the back of it. I also have 3 additional blank scraps here, little strips of cardstock that would have otherwise ended up in the trash. And I'm gluing those to the back of my stamped sentiment strip. That'll give it some raised dimension. Again, that will hold up nicely through the mail. I finished this off by adding some gold gemstones to the center of the flower, and that's it. We have the look of texture thanks to that plaid inking technique we did where we layered stencils together. We also have the embossed texture thanks to the embossing folder, and the embossed texture on our background thanks to the plaid embossing folder. I love using all these textures together because it really creates a fun card, especially in real life. I really wish you could see the texture in real life. So you can combine any stencils together to do that double stenciling to create the look of a pattern inside a more open area. Okay, this next technique has me very giddy. I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to have to do another video on it because it's so fun. This is a way of combining large solid stamps with stencils, and it works really well if you have a stamping tool like the MISTI. Any of the stamping platforms will work. I have the same woven stencil from Altenew, and I'm just making sure that I have my stamp oriented so that the stencil will cover it later on. Just stick with me. So now I'm putting that large stamp into my MISTI stamping tool. So this stamp lines up with the stencils I just showed you. We're just able to do more techniques with the kit because everything's included. I also have a piece of white cardstock in my stamping tool ready to stamp on. Instead of using the ink pad directly to ink up my stamp, I am using a blending brush. So I have a blending tool here. Any blending tool would work. Any ink would work. I am using Altenew Crisp Dye Inks. I'm applying yellow towards the top, and this gives a beautiful image every time. It is good if you stamp it maybe 1, 2, or 3 times to get more ink down, but it gives this beautiful crisp look. And then you can see it's kind of fading towards the bottom thanks to using the brush. Now I'm coming in with orange and applying that a little bit lower on the stamp, making sure to overlap some with the yellow we've already applied. This will allow us to create a beautiful rainbow that blends from the top of the stamp to the bottom of the stamp. So I did yellow and orange, now I'm applying some pink ink. And again, I'll repeat this a few times just to get a really crisp, solid look. And the more you overlap your inks, the better blending you'll get. Notice how a red color kind of appears there between the pink and the orange, thanks to the overlapping. And now I'm coming in with a purple here in the bottom, so I'm just blending from yellow down to purple. All right, now you could leave this image as is, but I'm going to step it up by combining it with a stencil. I'm laying the stencil on top of our stamp. There's no ink on the stamp, I'm just laying it right over it. I'm then taking a piece of tape and taping it onto the door of my stamping tool. Bear with me, this is really cool. I will now use a blending brush once again to apply ink over the stencil, starting at the top and just using a slightly darker ink than I used before. So this is a darker yellow or like a soft orange. And I'm applying that over the stencil onto our stamp. I will then flip the stencil out of the way and then stamp this onto our image. And the only ink that is on that stamp is what came through the stencil. So you're going to see a plaid appear on your stamped image. It's kind of hard to see here. I'm going to do it some more so you can see the color. Started with yellow, which is the hardest to see in the video, but bear with me, you'll see it. I put some ink over the stencil onto the stamp, flip the stencil out of the way, and press it down again. See how the plaid is starting to show up on the stamp? Let's do this with a darker orange. I closed the stencil down onto the stamp, applied a darker orange over the stencil onto the stamp, flipped the stencil out of the way, and stamped the image onto my paper. And I'll repeat this a couple times with each color so that I can be sure to get enough ink transferring to our stamped image. And you'll see that plaid pattern appear. Such a fun way to combine your stencils with your solid silhouette type stamps. Any stencils that have a lot of detail to it, like this plaid or woven pattern, maybe a polka dot stencil would work too, a stripe stencil. It really creates a unique look that you can't achieve many other ways. All right, so now I have stamped that floral image and stamped a plaid image on top, and it's nice and crisp white all around it. Okay, so now we can use the coordinating stencil to cut this out, and the coordinating embossing folder to add some embossed texture to it, just like we did on our last card. I tell you, there's nothing cooler than a stamped image and die cut that lines up with an embossing folder. I'm hoping that more of these products become available because it gives a beautiful look. You could even do solid ink here. Just do the whole stencil light blue and then do the plaid inking on top with the darker blue, and that would be beautiful too. All right, to finish off this, I am stamping a polka dot pattern on our note card. This is an Altenew Dainty Swiss Dots stamp set, one of my all-time most used stamp sets. I love this polka dot background, and I'll use it for a technique on a card later in this video too. So I'm lining up my note card onto the stamp, making sure the dots are straight, and closing the door on my MISTI and flipping it over so it's stuck to that Brutus Monroe sticky mat that I have placed inside. Now I can stamp this with a very light ink. Now this is a very, very light ink. I think it's called Lemon Ice from Altenew. Altenew does have a collection of super light inks that are great for background stamping. I like having that option because sometimes you want to add a little interest in the background, but not have it be too distracting. So a super light ink is always the best option. I glued our stamped floral piece right onto this note card and trimmed the excess off the edges. I added a friend's sentiment that I made with an Altenew alphabet die set called Fine Alphabet. This is a little bit shorter and a little bit bolder than the alphabet die set I used on my first card. I like having options. Underneath that, I stamped a sentiment strip using that tiny Sentiments Hello stamp set that I used on the last card also. As I said, this was a really fun technique to do, and I plan to do more variations and explore this a little bit more in a future video. So this is a good one if you have large solid silhouette type stamps and fun stencils. Okay, now let's move to our next example where I combine layering stencils with a background stamp. So it's kind of the opposite of what we just did. I will again use a fun bundle of products. This is from Altenew. It's the Build a Garden Nature's Magic. This is a 4x6 stamp set with 2 beautiful floral images and some sentiments. Then there are layering stencils that allow you to quickly color in those 2 floral images, and there are coordinating dies to cut them out. Of course, there's a guide that comes with it. Mine's trimmed down a little bit, but it makes it easy to figure out how to do the coloring. And again, these layering stencils have engraved markings, so it's easy to follow. Off screen, I stamped one of the large floral images with black pigment ink and then used clear embossing powder on it. And it's just on regular white cardstock. I used the coordinating die to cut it out. I, this time, am placing that onto a sticky mat inside of my stamping platform, inside of my MISTI stamping tool. This will help me to stamp over the stencils. So first I'm lining up the first layering stencil that coordinates with this image. And that sticky mat's going to hold that stencil and die cut in place as we apply ink over top. So I'm applying with a regular blending brush and some dye ink. This is Altenew Dye Ink, and putting a light amount of blue ink down. Again, use whatever inks and blending tools you have. Once I'm done, I can wipe my stencil clean, and we're going to stamp over those stencil openings. And I'm using that Dainty Swiss background stamp that I just used on my last card's background. You can see the stamp is well loved. I'm laying it over the openings of that stencil, and I'll ink this up with a slightly darker blue ink. This is Eastern Sky, one of my favorite colors, and I'm stamping over the stencil openings. You'll want to put some good pressure on this so that it gets into the nooks and crannies of the stencil opening. But what's happening here is I end up with polka dots on my flowers. You could also use a stripe background stamp, maybe a text background stamp, any background stamp that has fine detail to it. All right, now I'm coming in with the next layering stencil in the set. I'll apply a slightly darker amount of blue ink over these openings. I'm really just coloring in the petals of this floral stamped image. After I've applied the ink on top, we get to stamp on top of it, again with the slightly darker ink so that the dots show up on the inking we've already applied. Notice that my die cut hasn't moved. The floral stamp die cut hasn't moved. It's stayed on that sticky mat. And my stamp hasn't moved. So what's cool is my polka dots will line up across all of the floral image when we're done. The only thing moving here are the layering stencils. I'm just lining them up each time. Now it's time for the layering stencil that colors in the leaves, and I'm applying a light amount of Firefly green ink. And then once again, I'll pick a darker color ink, this is just green, and I'll stamp the polka dot stamp right onto those leaves. Again, put some pressure into it to get into the nooks and crannies of the stencil. I use a pressure tool that I got on Etsy. I'll link to that below, and that helps to kind of get into those nooks and crannies. All right, so the final layering stencil is to add a little bit of dark color to the leaves. I did forget to mask off the rest of my floral image here. I should have used a Post-it note to do so, because when I ink up my stamp and stamp over these openings, I do stamp onto my flower where I didn't want to. So I'll end up with some green ink on the edge of my blue flower. Didn't notice it at this point. I didn't notice it till later, and I decided to leave it as is. I think little bloopers like that are something that you'll notice as a creator, but the recipient won't. All right, for the background of my card, I stamped that polka dot stamp with Polar Bear ink from Altenew. This is a super, super light blue ink. Again, I like that light color for backgrounds. I'm cutting an opening from that background using these Altenew fine frame diamond dies, which I've used in videos before. I'm using my T-roller to make little marks at the halfway point along the top, bottom, and sides so I can center my diamond frame there. You don't have to do that. You can eyeball it if you want to. I'm using the largest of the diamond frames and cutting right in the center of our polka dot background. By the way, that background is cut to be 5 1/4 by 4 inches. Now, for the back of this, I am using foam tape. I don't use foam tape often because I find that it doesn't always hold up well in the mail, and it is pricey to use. If I do use foam tape, I like to put it up against each other and use quite a bit on the card. That way it will hold up in the mail nicely and not get crunched. So it was easier for me to put pieces of foam tape all up together on the back of this than to die cut a few extra backgrounds and place it behind these. It's just another option. You could use stacked die cuts or the foam tape, totally up to you. I added that onto a blue note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I'm gluing my flower die cut so it looks like it's kind of coming out of that diamond frame. For a sentiment on this one, I used another new Altenew product called Paint a Flower Flowering Dogwood. I love this large image, but I chose to use the You Have a Beautiful Heart on this card. I white heat embossed it onto a navy cardstock strip and added it right over our floral image. I also added a few gemstones here and there on the background. Here's a closer look at the dots that we added with the stamping over the stenciling. I love this look, and I definitely will be doing this again. Stripes would be fun, plaid would be fun. Use whatever you have. And I used this same dot background stamp on the background so it all ties together nicely. Okay, my last card combines die cutting with stamping. You could also do this same technique with die cutting and stencils, but I'm going with the stamps today. Now, I am blown away by the die set that I'll be using here. I've never seen this before. I don't know if this is new or not, but I think it is so clever. This Altenew flower die set has a little keyhole opening at the center of the flower that helps you to line up each layer. It also has a little number that will engrave into the die cut. Nobody will see it, but it allows you to figure out what order to stack your die cuts. So assembling this beautiful full flower will be super easy. So I used one of the dies to cut from cardstock. See that little keyhole opening? You use that to line it up. And it's also hard to see in the video, but you can see there's an engraved number next to the keyhole opening. That tells me what order to layer these. So I'm going to start with the backmost, the highest number. I think it's 4 or 5. And I'm putting that right onto the sticky mat that's inside of my stamping tool. Onto that die cut, I'll stamp that same Dainty Swiss dot background stamp. I love this stamp. I'm stamping that with a darker red ink. By the way, that was die cut number 4. I remember now. And now I have die cut 3. So you can see the 3 engraved on that. And I'm going to glue that on top of the 4, right there at the center, lining up that keyhole. Super easy to line up. No thinking, no having to really look at a guide. You just line up that keyhole. And I stamped a red ink on that too. I'm keeping all of my die cuts on that sticky mat so my dots line up on all the layers. I put glue on the center, and now I'm lining up the die cut number 2, and I'm lining up that keyhole again. We'll stamp with a light red ink on this. And then we will add number 1 die cut right onto the top. I chose to do different colors of cardstock for each layer, but you could do the same or maybe add some ink blending to them to add the look of depth. But adding these dots is a great way to give kind of a playful feel to this flower, different than what you would get if you skipped the dots. Stripes would also be nice too. And there you can see the result that you get, and that keyhole allowed me to line them all up easily. Super cool. The die set does include the layering dies to create another flower, and what's cool is the opening to line these up is a little arrow in the center. So I also was able to figure out which layered together, either the keyhole or the arrow, and it also helps with lining them up. So I did the same process with this one that I did with the last, stamping and then adding on the next layer, stamping and then adding on the next layer. So we were able to give a new look to these die cuts, adding stamping. You could do the same adding stencil on top if you wanted. All right, now let's finish off this card. For the background, I used this Altenew geometric background stamp. I love this and that there are additional images that you can stamp to fill in the openings of the background, creating unique, colorful looks. I've been wanting to use this stamp set for a while. On this card, I'm just using it as a simple background, but you really can step this one up very easily. Here is the guide that comes with it to show you lots of different ways you can use the set. So I just simply stamped that background stamp onto a white note card with a light pink ink. I also trimmed the note card down to be a little narrow, so it's 5.5 inches tall, and I think it's about 3.25 inches wide. That way I can have my flowers hang off the top left side, and it'll still fit in an envelope. So I put glue on the back of these two flowers. I have them kind of tucked together. And I also have some leaves that I layered together and added stamping, just like we did for our flowers. And I'll just tuck those behind the leaves so they peek, or behind the flowers, so they peek out a bit. For a sentiment, I used the Altenew Fancy Yay sentiment die. They have lots of fancy words like hello and thanks that I use often, and I was excited to use the yay for this card. I die cut the yay 3 times from black cardstock and glued it together, and then placed that right on top of our floral cluster. Notice that the card will still fit into a regular envelope, even though we have some of the die cuts hanging off the edge. Sometimes it's fun to trim a card narrow so you have that element hanging off. You can see the background stamping and the polka dots stamping that we did on our die cuts. This is a fun way to change up the look of any plain die cuts to add a little bit of interest. All right, so there you have many different ways you can combine stencils, stamps, and dies together to create different looks. I hope you'll give some of these a try. It's a wonderful, fun way to extend the life of your products. If you are interested in the supplies that I talked about here, I do have links in my description below. At the end here, I'll link to a couple other related videos so you can get some more ideas. Be sure to head over to my blog. I have a lot more information there, and you can bookmark cards and videos for future reference. Thanks for watching. Have a great week and see you soon.